1946. British intelligence places photographs of the Soviet heavy tank IS-3 on the military department's desk, and London falls very quiet. Because the pictures show a machine with armour up to 120 millimetres thick in the frontal projection and a shell that could pierce any serial British tank clean through. Moreover, the IS-3 did not appear as a response to any specific threat. It appeared as a statement. This is our main tank. Find a way to stop it. So what did British engineers do then? They decided to build the largest rifled gun that could possibly be hauled onto a tracked chassis. 183 millimetres. And here is where things get most interesting, because the machine that resulted from this killed the idea before the enemy ever got the chance to. Friends, some footage in this video has been recreated using artificial intelligence to enhance the quality of the presented material. Enjoy the viewing! If you ask anyone interested in British armoured vehicles of the Cold War era what the FV4005 is, most will say, "Ah, that's the huge tank destroyer with the monster gun." And that's usually the end of it. It remained a single prototype, never saw combat, and it's commonly considered just an experimental dead end. Well, it happens. They tried, it didn't work out, they forgot, they scrapped the idea and quietly moved on. But there's a nuance. When you start digging deeper, you discover a story not of a technical dead end, but of a systemic failure of thinking. And a failure of a very specific kind. British engineers brilliantly solved the problem they were given, and precisely because of that, they suffered defeat. The problem was formulated incorrectly from the very beginning, and this is not a slip of the tongue. This is the essence of the whole story. So, what exactly was required of the new machine? The British Ministry of Defence in the late 40s formulated the requirement simply and harshly. Guaranteed destruction of the Soviet heavy tank IS-3 with one hit. Not to hit, not to penetrate the armor, but precisely to destroy. Completely, without a second chance, because whoever gives an IS-3 a second chance won't get a second chance themselves. It was this requirement, one shot, one tank, that determined everything that followed. Both the technical appearance of the machine and its fate. Under this requirement, several machines were developed within the FV4000 program. FV4005 is the designation of the specific variant that made it to metal. At its core, the chassis of the Centurion, a reliable and well-mastered platform that by then had already proven itself in the Korean War. Onto it, a gun with a caliber of 183 millimeters was to be installed. This is a naval-class gun. The shell weighed 72 kilograms. The cartridge case, another 30 plus. Loading, separate by 2 crew members. One person physically could not lift the complete round. And in the confined space of the fighting compartment, even more so. Honestly, when I first saw these numbers in David Fletcher's work, British Battle Tanks, British-made tanks of World War II, I stopped and reread them. 72 kilogram shell, plus 30 for the case. 2 men. In a turret, on a moving vehicle. These are not performance characteristics, this is a description of penal servitude. Imagine, you've just fired a gun whose recoil shakes the entire vehicle so much that the crew loses their bearings, and immediately you have to lift a 72 kilogram load, ram it into the breech, insert the cartridge case, and do it within 30 seconds. And what do you think happened to the rate of fire? Less than 2 rounds per minute. Under the best conditions, on the test range, in good weather with a rested crew. This means first shot and 30 seconds of complete helplessness while the crew strains with a new shell. On the battlefield, 30 seconds is an eternity. In that time, any enemy vehicle you didn't destroy with the first shot would have had time not just to return fire, but to change position, take cover, and open fire again. But let's return to the gun. The recoil from firing a barrel of such caliber is a monstrous phenomenon. The recoil mechanisms for it turned out so heavy that the entire turret with armament weighed in at roughly 20 tons. The Centurion is a sturdy machine, but not designed for such a load on top. The center of gravity shot upwards. The vehicle began to sway threateningly on any slope. At the Bobington test range during trials, cases were recorded where, after a shot, the hull jerked so violently that the crew inside lost their orientation. There could be no talk of firing from short halts, on the move, or on rough terrain. And now pay attention. How was the overweight problem solved? The only way left: to lighten the turret to the limit. The turret armor was made from sheet steel 14 millimeters thick. 14! That's not even armor, that's truck bodywork. Any heavy caliber machine gun, any aircraft cannon shell, fragments from a nearby explosion, all of this would disable the turret guaranteed. Worse still, the turret was so large in size, it was made big so the crew could somehow work with those shells, that missing it even from a distance was difficult. A land battleship with a cardboard superstructure. This is what happened. The machine could destroy a Soviet heavy tank with one shot, but it practically could not approach it to a range of confident destruction without being destroyed itself. Because while it's hauling its gun to a position, any enemy light armor would have already picked apart its turret with their guns. Infantry with a grenade launcher would handle it just as well. Even an area mortar barrage, a serious threat for a vehicle with such a turret. Here, the official version begins to crack. It's customary to say the program was closed due to technical difficulties and a change in concept. But honestly, that's a diplomatic cover for the obvious. The machine could not be used in combat as intended. It could only fire from a stationary position, only from a pre-selected spot, only under conditions where the enemy kindly drove right up to its barrel and waited 30 seconds after the first shot. This is not a tank destroyer. This is an expensive ambush for a single use. Now, about how the same problem was solved on the other side. The Soviet Union, facing the threat of Western medium and heavy tanks, took a fundamentally different path. Instead of one monstrous gun, high rate of fire and mobility, the ISU-122 carried a 100mm shell and was far better protected. Yes, one shot did not guarantee destruction, but the second followed quickly. And the third, even faster. The philosophy of saturating the target with multiple hits versus the philosophy of killing with one shot. What do we get in reality? In the conditions of real combat, where positions change, columns disperse, the enemy dictates the pace, the Soviet concept proved more realistic. It accounted for chaos. This is British. No. For a long time, I couldn't understand why the British even chose this path. Then I found the answer in the logic of military planning of that era. In the late 40s, British strategists were building scenarios for the defense of Western Europe against a massive Soviet armored assault. It was assumed that IS-3s would advance in dense columns through narrow passages, the Fulda Gap, mountain roads, bridges. And here, on pre-selected positions, vehicles were supposed to be stationed, capable of knocking out the lead tank of a column with a single hit, blocking the road, and buying time for reserves to approach. In this scenario, the FV4005 made sense. Exactly one scenario out of 1,000 possible. The problem is that war rarely goes according to plan, and the entire logic of the vehicle fell apart as soon as the column didn't go where expected, or when infantry with grenade launchers approached the position, or when artillery simply saturated the area. 14 millimeters of armor saved it from nothing. A machine created for one perfect moment was helpless in any other. As a result, by 1957, the program was shut down. The sole surviving prototype, it now stands in the Tank Museum in Bovington, a huge, absurd, in its own way, majestic machine. Its turret was removed for testing, then returned to its place. People who approach it usually look at the barrel first and fall silent, because when you see this gun in person, words about technical difficulties somehow just fade away. So it turns out, British engineers did exactly what was asked of them. The gun really did penetrate everything that existed at the time. Technically, a brilliant piece of work. But the task was formulated for them in such a way that the correct solution was doomed from the start. The requirement to kill with one shot gave birth to a machine that was killed before it could fire. Write in the comments which weapon system to break down in the next video. See you soon! This is part 2 of 2.